They threw a blind Latina off the 14th Street Bridge at 3 a.m. No witnesses, no body cam. Just the river waiting below. They thought the current would swallow her whole. But the river, it knew her name. Stay with me till the end, because this isn't just a story, it's a reckoning. Subscribe now, because what you're about to hear will make you question who truly drowns and who finally learns to swim in the dark. They said the water under the 14th Street Bridge could tear the soul out of a man, but that night it whispered her name, Marisol. She sat in her wheelchair near the rail, the city lights trembling far below like frightened stars, and in her chest, the sound of her heartbeat was louder than the sirens that had once chased her through the broken streets of the South Bronx. For years, Marisol had been invisible, the woman people stepped around at crosswalks, the janitor who cleaned the precinct floors, the one who'd been crushed between justice and survival. But tonight she wasn't running anymore. The storm above her wasn't made of rain or thunder. It was made of truth, long buried and clawing its way out. Hours earlier, she had uncovered something in the police archives that wasn't meant to exist, footage that showed the men who framed her cousin for a crime he didn't commit. The footage that proved her nephew's arrest was no accident, and when she took it to the station demanding answers, she heard the same smirks, the same cruelty wrapped in blue uniforms. Now headlights cut through the fog behind her, unmarked cars, engines rumbling with intent. She felt them before she heard them, like a tremor under her skin. Fear wanted to crawl up her spine, but she locked her hands on the cold steel of her chair. Steady as a soldier, she had seen this coming. She'd felt it in every sleepless night, in every whispered threat that followed. Her like a shadow, they thought they'd cornered her, a blind Latina on the edge of nowhere, but what they didn't know was that Marisol had been preparing for this. Night for years, she had learned to move, not just with her body, but with her mind, her instincts. Her faith, the truth wasn't heavy. It had current, and so did she, though she hadn't yet learned what kind. The sound of car doors slamming echoed like gunshots through the mist. You shouldn't have gone snooping. Marisol, a voice said, deep, steady, and soaked in arrogance. She didn't look back. Her face was fixed on the black water where the storm was breaking open, bleeding silver into the dark. You think you can scare me? She said quietly, her words trembling but not weak. You already took everything. A pause. A bootstep. The scrape of gravel. The man came closer, his silhouette swallowed by the fog. We can still make this easy, he said. Just hand it over. But the USB drive was gone, hidden where they'd never find it. Marisol smiled for the first time. That night, you're already too late, and that's when it happened. The world tilting, the wheelchair rolling, the river devouring her as the bridge gave way beneath her wheels. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. No scream, no sound, just the endless drop and the water rising to meet her. But then something ancient awoke in her. Not muscle, not magic, but memory. The memory of every time she'd fallen and risen again. The memory of her abuela's voice whispering, "The river don't care if you see, mija. It just carries you." The darkness beneath her wasn't death. It was space. It was freedom. And before the river could claim her, Marisol spread her arms, felt the rush of the current catch her. And for the first time in her life, she stopped sinking. She wasn't swimming because she had eyes. She was swimming because she finally remembered she'd never needed any. When Marisol opened her eyes, dawn was bleeding through the projects, soft light flickering across her face like the first breath of mercy after a night of judgment. The fall should have killed her, shattered her bones, broken her spine again, but she was alive, lying in the embrace of tangled rebar at the riverbank, her wheelchair wrecked beside her like a ghost of her old life. Her hands trembled as she touched her chest, her pulse steady but strange, as if her heart was beating in two worlds at once, one of flesh and one of spirit. She couldn't remember how she had survived. All she recalled was the water wrapping around her like her abuela's arms, carrying her, holding her, refusing to let her die. She tried to move, and pain screamed through her. But it wasn't the pain of defeat. It was the pain of rebirth. Above her, the bridge loomed like the mouth of a monster she'd escaped, and somewhere up there, the men who thought they'd erased her were already erasing the evidence, writing her name into the list of lost souls. But they had no idea she was still breathing, still burning, still carrying the truth inside her. Marisol dragged herself through the mud, every inch forward powered by the same rage that had once made her believe in justice. Her cousin's face flashed before her eyes, his laugh, his arrest, the cell that became his coffin. "They won't bury me the way they buried him," she whispered through gritted teeth, crawling toward the sunlight until she reached a cracked sidewalk. A city bus slowed in the distance, its engine humming like a heartbeat. A driver, grey beard, kind eyes, the smell of coffee and diesel. He stopped, looked down, and for a moment their worlds collided. The forgotten woman and the man who had long stopped believing in miracles. He helped her aboard without asking questions, but his silence spoke of recognition. He had seen her face on the precinct cameras. "You shouldn't be alive," he muttered, driving fast, his knuckles pale on the wheel. "Guess I didn't get the memo," she said, forcing a thin smile. They rode for hours through winding streets until they reached an abandoned bodega in the South Bronx, a place that seemed untouched by time. The driver left her there with food and water, saying only, "They'll come looking, but you've got something they fear." As his bus disappeared into the horizon, Marisol sat alone in the silence, surrounded by dusty shelves and faded lottery tickets, trying to piece together the fragments of what she had become. The USB drive, the one they wanted, was still safe, hidden in the lining of her coat, containing enough truth to destroy every man who had conspired against her family. But truth was useless without a voice to carry it, and she had to decide whether to rise again or stay buried in the ashes of her old self. As night fell, she lit a candle on the cracked counter and whispered a prayer, not for forgiveness but for strength. Then she heard it. Footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, closing in. Her pulse quickened. Shadows moved across the boarded windows, and a beam of a flashlight sliced through the dark. They'd found her. But this time she wasn't the same woman who'd rolled to the edge of that bridge. This time she had current they couldn't see. The door creaked open, and Marisol's eyes reflected the flame like molten gold. The hunter had returned to finish what he started, but the prey had learned how to swim. Rain drummed against the tin roof like a heartbeat racing toward destiny, and Marisol sat in the shadowed aisle, watching the door breathe with every gust of wind. Her mind sharper than fear itself. The man who stepped inside wasn't in uniform anymore. He'd shed his badge for anonymity, but guilt clung to him heavier than armor, and even through the darkness she recognized his voice, the same rigid tone from that night on the bridge. For a long moment, neither moved. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid, and Marisol's voice broke the silence first, calm and steady, like someone who'd finally remembered her own power. "You came all this way to find a ghost," she said, and her words hung in the air like smoke. The man hesitated, his flashlight trembling, searching the darkness as if seeing a haunting. "You don't understand what you're doing," he muttered, but his voice carried the quiver of a man who did understand too well. Marisol rolled forward, the candlelight painting her features in amber fire, her face no longer pleading, but piercing. "I understand enough," she replied. "You killed my cousin with lies, and now you're trying to bury the truth with me." She reached inside her coat, pulling out the USB drive, the small piece of plastic that held an empire's worth of rot. "This is everything you tried to hide. Every name, every signature, every stain you thought would never see daylight." The man's breath caught. He took a step back as if the truth itself were a weapon pointed at him. "If you release that," he said, "how you'll burn the whole department." Marisol's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Then maybe it needs to burn." Outside, thunder rolled like applause. In that instant, she wasn't a fugitive. She was the storm, the reckoning in flesh and bone. The man turned to leave, but Marisol's voice stopped him again. "Tell them," she said quietly, "that the woman they threw away learned how to rise." When he was gone, she sat alone beneath the leaking roof, shaking, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of possibility. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, not chasing her, but calling the world to witness what was coming. She opened an old laptop, slipped the USB drive in, and watched the files load. Hundreds of documents, images, reports, proof of corruption so deep it roared through the screen. Her hands trembled, but she pressed send anyway, releasing the truth into the world like a fish through an open net. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw her cousin standing beside her, smiling. The rain stopped. Dawn cut through the window in thin golden lines, touching her face, And for the first time in years, Marisol felt weightless. Not because she was swimming, but because the current no longer had a claim on her spirit. By the time the sun climbed fully over the projects, the whole city was already stirring under the weight of revelation. Screens flashing headlines, radios crackling disbelief, voices rising in streets that had once been silent. The files Marisol sent were spreading like floodwater through the heart of every newsroom and courtroom that had ever turned its back on truth. She sat on a bench by the river, wrapped in a worn coat, the wind lifting her hair as if it too was celebrating her survival. Across the water, helicopters hovered, searching for someone who no longer existed in the way they remembered her. The woman who had fallen was gone, replaced by the one who had risen. A passerby recognized her from the broadcasts, the face of the so-called miracle survivor, and hesitated to speak, but Marisol only smiled and told them, "Tell them I'm fine," before wheeling herself farther down the path toward the old bridge that shimmered in morning light. The memories came in waves. Her abuela's laughter, her cousin's promise, the endless nights of scrubbing precinct floors that reflected everyone's justice but her own. Each memory felt lighter now, like silt settling from a burden she'd carried too long. Somewhere behind her, sirens howled again, but this time they weren't hunters. They were echoes of a system crumbling under its own secrets. The men who had chased her were being summoned, questioned, suspended. One had turned himself in. The world was watching, and for the first time the world saw her. Reporters would later call it the fall that changed everything. A story about a woman who refused to stay broken. But for Marisol, the miracle was simpler. She had learned that survival wasn't about escaping the river, but about defying expectation. She paused on the bridge, listening to the water that glittered like liquid sky, and for a fleeting instant, she felt the same lift she'd felt when the current had saved her. An invisible thread connecting earth and spirit. Pain and release. She wasn't running anymore. She was guiding the storm she'd become. Behind her, a young girl tugged her mother's sleeve, pointing at Marisol with awe, whispering, "Is that the lady who can swim in the dark?" And Marisol turned, eyes soft, answering without words by simply raising her face to the wind. The moment held, quiet, infinite, sacred. And then she moved forward, each push of her wheels a declaration that no one could cast her down again. The camera of the world would fade from her story. The noise would pass, but somewhere in every soul that had